All right, so you should be able to see the screen and we should be ready to go. In just a moment, I'm recording. Okay, just letting everybody cycle in. So we're just giving it another moment. Hey, Razvan. Hey, Stephanie. Jacobo. Hey, Lily. This time slot works for you? Glad to hear. Chase Mang. Hey, Lago. Alrighty, just another little moment. We're letting everybody get in. Usually it just takes a little bit of time for everybody to kind of come in and get sorted. 9 p.m. in the UK. Where do we have people from, guys? Give me a shout out. So Newcastle. Hey, Carl. Also, while we're here, Florida. Hey, Overton. How many people are new to ZBrush? How many people are totally new to ZBrush and haven't really, and let's give new a bit of a spectrum. Maybe you've opened it and you've said, what the, and then closed it. And been like, yeah, let me get back to you when we're all on the same planet. Hey, Scotland. Well, I'm going to talk to you today about the CERT, the ZBrush CERT program. And there's a lot of ways to learn ZBrush. And they're all really, really great. That's one of the awesome things about being a ZBrusher is there's a lot of fantastic ways to do that. And I'll tell you a little bit about my story. But I think that the ZBrush CERT program was designed to pick up where everybody else left off. And that's just because of my unique position. So we're just letting everybody cycle in. The numbers are still going up. So just another 30 seconds or so. So if you're just getting in, we're just letting everybody cycle in. So we're just giving it just another moment. We're going to start out, we're going to talk about the ZBrush way, because there is a way. Anybody here a master of another discipline? Like let's say Taekwondo. You know, that's one thing, right? Or what about, you know, an illustrator? So you've got Illustrator down and you've got your career and everything moving along. Or maybe you're a dancer. I've got a great student. He runs a ballet school in Spain. Painter, bronze, play tennis. I remember I was playing tennis with some friends, I don't know, years ago, because I haven't played tennis since that. And I don't think I've had my behind handed to me that badly ever. It was horrible. I did not understand, you know, what was happening, when, where, and I had no idea of like the strategies. And there was a good friend from Italy. He just kept. It was such a simple strategy. I saw my friend Travis. He was handling things just fine. But man, I got up there and he'd go from one side of the court to the other side of the court to the other side of the court, and I'm like, I'm failing miserably. But once you know tennis, you know these things aren't so hard, right? It's just like that. But there's a way. You got to know the language. You got to know the language for tennis. You got to know some of the strategies so that you can anticipate what people are doing. So you need to be able to anticipate what ZBrush is going to do. That has a lot to do with expectations. What can you expect out of ZBrush? All of that stuff. Jacobo's a free climber. That's intense. Do you have a rating that you work on, or do you just kind of go out there and just climb stuff for the heck of it? Because that gets to be its own thing. I used to be a rock climber, and I think I got to a 510B, and then I free climbed a 5.7. A rock slipped, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. That's 70 feet down. Why am I doing this? Why am I 70 feet above the ground? Maybe I need to think of my priorities. All right, so it looks like we've got everybody in. So hello, my name is Ryan. I'm going to be walking you through ZBrush a little bit today. So let's get this thing started. And the presentation is going to be real simple, real straightforward. Okay, I want to tell you a little bit about me, a little bit about URT, a little bit about the ZBrush certificate, and then I'm going to get into ZBrush and start telling you a little bit about ZBrush. So first, let me tell you about myself. You may not know this, but I actually used to work for Pixelogic. I was the first product developer for ZBrush. I was like employee number 4. Worked there for a couple of years while they transitioned from ZBrush 2 to ZBrush 3 and then beyond. So I was the primary contact. If you Google ZBrush or you Google me, you'll find a lot of tutorials about ZBrush, and some of them going back 6, 7, 8+ years, because that's how long I've been doing this. Over 8 years, all the way back to just a few weeks after ZBrush 2 was released. So what I'm hoping to impart to you in this course is not just another workflow, but a way for you to develop your own workflows. I'm going to teach you how ZBrush thinks, not because, you know, it's just some fun thing to do, but because I was there, I was in the meetings, I was part of developing things like subtools, Dynamesh, and the framework for Dynamesh. I was there doing things like transpose. I was part of the development team, and during that time, I learned a lot of amazing, wonderful things about coding, about development, and also about art. Because the one thing we can never forget is that ZBrush is an artistic program. This is different. This is different than a lot of the other programs out there. How many people here use Modo, or they use Maya, or Max, or XSI, the now defunct XSI? How many people out here use some of these other tools? So Kevin uses Maya, and Kevin, you probably know Maya's been around for a long time, right? Maya's been around for how long? Does anybody know? 15, 20 years, 15 years maybe, I think close to 20. And what was Maya before it became Maya? Because it was something else, right? Before it was Maya, it was Alias, Wavefront, something or another. Maya was supposed to be the more user-friendly version of the software that they could get into the film houses for like ILM to work on, and Autodesk, or at that point Alias Wavefront, very focused on connecting with large clients like ILM and things of that nature. What's the difference between a company that's focused on connecting with ILM and large companies and, you know, massive pipelines and visual effects studios versus a company that's focused on individual artists and, you know, jewelry, fine art, things like that? There's a difference between those companies, right? There's a different focus. What would you imagine would be some of those differences? Any thoughts? Just in your mind, a couple of words that come out. What would they do differently? Would they do anything differently? Because the thing we have to remember is that Maya comes from a very strong engineering background. There's a reason why AutoCAD owns it. And remember, AutoCAD is, or Autodesk is, you know, their main program, AutoCAD. It's an engineering-focused program. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth and the system and all of that stuff. But I just want to plant the seed in your mind. These other programs, most other programs are engineering based. So they're focusing on things like production, which is another way of saying they're focused on workflow. They're focused on multiple parts and pieces coming together and interacting. ZBrush is not that, much to the chagrin of many people. Many people would like ZBrush to fit much more nicely into other programs. But in order for ZBrush to be what it is, we have to first accept that it has solved what was at one point an unsolvable problem. How do you create an artistic piece of software that interacts with the user in real time with millions of polygons? Okay. How do you do that? Well, the first thing you do is you have a company that's focused on the artist, and that means doing things differently. That means definitely doing things differently, because Maya, if anybody's tried to learn Maya and struggled, it took me 3 months to learn that program. 3 months. So we're going to get more into all of that stuff. ZBrush, much faster. I was there during one of the pivotal transition stages where most of the tools that are out there today were developed and the framework was kind of set for them. So I can remember the conversations about Dynamesh. What is Dynamesh? Why does Dynamesh exist? How does Dynamesh function for us as artists? What are our expectations? I can tell you all of that crystal clear, so that you understand exactly where it fits into the spectrum of things, why it was developed, and how you can use it. That's my job at this point. That's why I created ZBrush workshops and all that stuff. I'm not just a ZBrusher though. You see me in this picture right now. I'm sculpting. I sculpt in clay. I also paint. So I'm an artist as well, doing all kinds of different things, drawing, everything. I'm also a trained poet and, a whole bunch of other things from there. We're going to take this course at UArtsy. This is going to be part of UArtsy, which is an outgrowth of ZBrush Workshops. ZBrush Workshops eventually grew into UArtsy. And you can see here a little bit, UArtsy is very project focused. So what you're seeing on the screen are the projects that students are doing. So this is from Furio Tedeschi's class, and then there's animal sculpting with Steve Lord. That's his class. So here we've got, like in this case, this means a sculpt of a horse. Okay, we're going to do similar things. We'll have exercises where you accomplish very specific things. You upload them so everybody can see them and interact and go from there. So the ZBrush certification, the couple of things you need to know about this course. One, there's already 370 odd students in there. There's over 2,000 projects posted by these students, so that's a lot of work, right? That's multiple pieces per person. Okay, the other thing you need to understand is lifetime access, and then the other part of it that I always forget to tell you guys is that it's free upgrades. So this is going to be the fifth time that I've run the ZBrush certification course. If you would have taken this the first time I offered it a couple of years ago, you will have gotten every single version. Every time I ran the class, you would have gotten that 100% free. It's just part of the deal. So when you sign up for the class, keep in mind you're not signing up for just this class. You're signing up to be kind of part of a family. Like we've got a lot of people in this class, a lot of people that know ZBrush very well and that help out anybody who's new, either through the private Facebook group or through the UArtsy interface. So lots of stuff to do, but I want to keep in mind that when you commit to this class, and I like to keep the ZBrush spirit alive, right? And you know that if you bought ZBrush, you get every version of it since for free. As long as they're doing that, we're doing this. Because ZBrush it was my first love in terms of software. Maya, I was amazed at, I was in awe of it. But when I started ZBrush, I was like, I am in love. Has anybody else here had that experience? Because it's really interesting. I was talking to Rick Baker, who you might know as he's the, I think 7-time Academy Award winner, but he was the first Academy Award winner for visual effects, really helped define this. And this was back in the day, this is a long time ago when he was first learning it. He started picking up ZBrush, and he just, it was an entire weekend. His wife considered it the mistress because he's just engrossed in this program. because it does that to us. And it does that to us not by chance. That's what I'm hoping to communicate with you in this webinar. If you feel a deep, abiding love for ZBrush, that's not chance, man. That is designed. And it's because of the choices that they made in development. I was there for many of those choices. So I want to make sure that I give you a ground level seat right there, so you can see how all of that thinking was done. Okay, so now I think that's the end. That's how short the PowerPoint is. Now what we want to do is get ourselves into ZBrush and just start talking. What is it? What is it that ZBrush is all about? There's so many things that we can do in ZBrush. Let me just start my my screen drawing program so I can start to draw on it. In many ways, we all already know the core fundamentals. So in fact, let me get this from you. What's the core fundamental of ZBrush? What is it that you can do in ZBrush? Some of you guys will have your own ideas and your own way of using it. So I always love to ask this because I always get these really interesting approaches. So sculpting, digital sculpting, Steve uses it for the pixel, which is at 2.5D. Lily uses it to visualize in 3. What are you visualizing, Lily? Bobby's the freedom in sculpting. Lily does character design, yeah. So you're visualizing characters. Awesome. Adding tertiary details is what Jason says. So he'll come from like Maya or some other program and he'll add skin and things of that nature. Jace is designing jewelry. Larry is boundaryless sculpting, because if you're sculpting something in clay, right, you have the armature. You got the armature and then you got like all this stuff. I mean, gosh, let's take a quick look at something. I'm going to show you some of the problems I have in sculpting. I'm not sure it'll come across, but let's see if it does. Yeah, it should be in here. Okay. So you might not be able to really see too much of this, but here's a sculpt, and check out. So one, I've got the armature, but look at this. I've had to actually post these extra little pieces on both sides, and then I put wire in there because there's a wire coming around in here and there's a wire coming out of the back. Wouldn't that be significantly easier to just 3D print that ring? What about this girl? This is intense. So I've got this big ring coming around right here, and I've got my armature coming into the back, but I've got to have these massive pieces. You can't see the one over here. I've got these massive pieces of metal kind of anchored into the stand, and they've got little wires coming from them in. Also this head coming down. There's so much engineering that goes in to actually making this stuff happen when you're sculpting. So being able to kind of work more fluidly, more, effortlessly is not a small thing to be able to do. Sarah sculpts in jewelry. And Bobby, yeah, 3D printing, you're right there with me, right? And Mitchell's doing product design and concepting. So Modo and things like that are really great when you need to do, say, a phone. Maybe you got a commission and your job is to do the next Apple phone, and now you're dealing with bevels and a lot of precision in there. But what if you've got to do a toy, right? So, if you want, take a look at this guy, Steve Lord. Just do a quick Google of Steve Lord since you're at your computer and see some of the work that he does all inside of ZBrush. And I like to talk about Steve Lord. So while you're looking at this, I'm going to tell you a little bit about his story. But Steve Lord was working at this company. He's a traditionally trained sculptor. He was working there when they had an entire traditional team. So they would sculpt in clay, and they would go from clay to wax, and they would go from wax to, on from there down the production pipeline. What happened to people who were traditional sculptors when ZBrush came around? Anybody here lose their job as a result of that? If you did, you're absolutely not alone. I have people transitioning into ZBrush all the time because traditional sculptors have the skills. So it might kind of suck that right now, you have to transition into ZBrush. But if you're a traditional sculptor, man, you are in one of the best positions in the world. Because all you got to do is learn a piece of software. It's like a couple of weeks, a month, 10 weeks of your life, whatever. Once you've learned this, man, it's a whole nother world. So you got Steve Lord, he's working in a department of 10 people. He's the only one that picks up digital. And he tells all his buddies, listen, you guys gotta pick this up. This is amazing. He's the only one that does it. What happens to the 9 other guys? The 9 other guys, some of them with families, they're let go several months later. Like literally, months later, they're looking for work. But the beautiful part of that, if there's a beautiful part, is all they had to do, and all they have to do, and many of them have already done it, learn ZBrush, and man, you're gold. Because ZBrush, part of teaching you ZBrush is teaching you how to sculpt. If you already have that, then you're just learning the tools. Part of the ZBrush certificate program is I'm going to be teaching you also how to sculpt. Because you might know oil painting, but if you switch over to acrylic, you still got some things to learn. You got to learn how to build form and things like that. But all the conceptual stuff is there. You're gold. Traditional sculpting, Razvan, is clay. And so before ZBrush, one of the main ways that sculptors, if you got like a fine arts degree in sculpting or something like that, one of the main ways you would make a living is you'd go work in toy companies or the US Mint or some collectible company, or you come out to the West Coast and you work for film and games and you do things like what Jordu Shell does. You make clay maquettes. Jordu Shell can make a clay maquette in a week or so. Don't quote me on this, and I haven't talked to Jordu specifically about it. I'm just referencing off the top of my head. And he's fast. He's really fast in how he does these things. But you take a look at a guy like, say, Neville Page. He can do a creature in the afternoon, a creature in the morning, and do the same thing the next day. So somebody like Steven Spielberg can come in and be looking at that creature design in the morning, and then they get an iteration, a complete iteration, or an entire new character in the afternoon. That was not possible before ZBrush. Do you think somebody like James Cameron is going to want his designs done yesterday? So what does James Cameron do when he's got Avatar? How many characters are there in Avatar? How much of a world is there in Avatar? An entire ecosystem. So what does he do? Well, he brings Jordu and a couple of other guys and Brahm and some illustrators, but he also brings ZBrushers, Neville, Andrew Kars, guys like this. And they go down to his house and they start breaking this out. So as I understood it at that point, James had his own kind of atelier or challenge to the death, really, between all these different mediums. Which one was going to give him the most impact? And at the helm of that, you saw Neville Page coming out with all these amazing sculpts, showing the mechanics of how these beasts, the winged beasts, would be moving their mouths and all of that stuff. A level of depth that 2D can't compete with. And traditional sculpting can't compete with, because once I scan this, sculpt it, whatever, how much does it take for me to just start to move the pose around and adjust it? Start to get them to bend over a little bit. Not a whole heck of a lot. Damon brings up this really great point, though. He says that for the Navi, it did go back to clay. So I'm spending time talking about ZBrush, but you may notice I'm in clay. This is just, what, a couple weeks ago? A couple weeks ago here, I think. So even though I'm in ZBrush, I still work in clay. So this is a really good point, and thanks, Damon, for bringing this up. ZBrush is not replacing anything, but it is significantly more powerful than clay in visualization, in rapid prototyping. But can it give us that visceral feeling and that kind of sculpted look? That's one of the things that all computer software is missing until we get holography and all of this other stuff. But there is nothing that beats ZBrush at this point in terms of rapid visualization. So the ideas go through ZBrush and it becomes a concepting tool. And then, oddly enough, it's so weird, but clay becomes something that's not at the beginning of the stage, but maybe at the end. Maybe at the end. So many things you can do. You can draw. You can sculpt. You can view scan data. This is scan data. It's a bunch of scan data in there from the anatomy class that I run. And we're able to view scan data here. Look at this, analyze it. We're able to, say, even study anatomy. So ZBrush is not just a sculpting tool for me. It's also a learning tool for me. So in my anatomy class, we come through and literally build. Let me get this out of the way. The anatomical structures or adjust things to help me understand what I'm doing. So here I've got my scan data, and then ZBrush ships with my anatomy figure. So if I go into Tool, you'll see here Ryan Kingslien anatomy model. It ships right there, so I can go in and open that up. Close Lightbox. And this is my anatomy model with all of these muscles, 90-something subtools. So I can take any of these and bring them in to scan data, and it becomes a learning tool for me. And this is what we were doing in the Unleash Anatomy class, is just kind of starting to understand, how do we fit these things in? Where is the head of the humerus? How does it fit in, left, right, sideways, whatever? Building the muscles and studying it. When I started to teach myself to get deeper and deeper into anatomy, I didn't draw. I used ZBrush. Drawing is great, but drawing does not get you in like sculpting. I would sculpt an écorché, but clay can't get you deep and embedded in where you're actually placing the head of the humerus where you think it should be. You can't do that with clay, but you can do that with ZBrush. And ZBrush is literally my medium. You might call it a software, but I'm now learning to think about these things totally different. I'm an artist. I work in mediums. I work in clay, I work in oil paint, and I work in ZBrush. I have multiple things that I'm working in. Overton's also learning ZBrush, or anatomy with ZBrush. So this is a powerful, powerful program. We looked at drawing. I talked about drawing. Let me show you drawing. So config, I'm going to go back to a standard UI. And let's just go into this thing called Quick Sketch. So it's got this kind of crazy program. This is all the rage a little bit. Neville Page, who, if you don't know Neville, he's kind of one of the judges on, I think it's called Face Off. But he did a little tutorial on this, on how you can kind of create design symmetry and go a little nutty with all of it. But they built this little script, which is all this is. It's just a little script to help you see kind of how far you can take ZBrush and what you might be able to accomplish. The program is a lot more vast than you might think. But the system that I'm using right now is not too complex, because at the heart of everything inside of ZBrush is this basic system. That's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So let's get this model back up here. There's a system to everything inside of ZBrush. But before I get into that system, I want to put a thought into your mind. I want to put a concept into your mind that'll help us anchor in what ZBrush is, and not only ZBrush, but what, if you're a developer, how you develop an artistic piece of software. So at the core of what we do, not in ZBrush, but as an artist, is this little universal matrix that I've developed. On one hand, there is an approach. There is a way that we do things. And there are things that we do. So there's a what, and there's a how, right? How do you sculpt? So for example, how do you paint? How do you create ideas? How do you run a business? How do you do any of these things? There's always a way. And so what I've done is started to think about this in sort of a kind of a specific spectrum. There's loose and there's controlled. Loose is like plein air painting, gesture drawings. Loose and open form. Open form is another word that they use. Open form, you want a sense of open form, take a look at Justin Sweet. There's a lot of words for this. They also call it implied form. That's another word for it. Down here under controlled, there's also closed form. Depends on where you are. East Coast, they tend to call it open form, closed form, because there's a philosophical connection to it. Here on the West Coast, I have heard implied form and explicit form. Doesn't really matter, but if you want to see a sense of this, I'm just going to go right back to Neville. Neville Page has a very closed form approach to much of what he does. Another word for loose is atmospheric. Another word for controlled could be illustrative. You get the sense, like there's a lot of different words for it. And I'm not trying to say that there's only one way to look at this. I'm trying to say this is a spectrum for you and me to understand ZBrush. So there's different ways that we sculpt, and there's different ways that that we approach things. Then there's different things that we approach. So there are soft forms and there are hard forms. Soft. Soft is like lips. Faces tend to be soft, right? Sort of. They're odd because they're actually bony, so they're this beautiful combination of hard and soft. But let's just, for most people, they don't tend to think skull and things like that, so it tends to be a softer thing. Humans, bodies, they tend to be softer, right? What's hard? A vehicle. And hard in terms of straight lines. Concepting a car. Some elements of concepting a car is soft, but not really. There's clean, pure lines. A tank is a hard surface. Okay, a gun, a belt. These tend to be harder surface forms. So I left a word out that'll really help. So hard surface and soft forms. Let's just use that. So are you with me right now? Does this concept make sense to you? Hard surface versus organic is another way to say it. Razvan. And yeah, okay, great. So Jason's on with me. Who else? Yeah, good. We just cycled through and saw more. Alrighty. So this concept is really important for how ZBrush works, because I'm going to redraw this here in another moment. I'm going to get to the system in a second, but I'm going to redraw this now, and I'm going to put an extra little tidbit in there. Soft, hard, loose, controlled. Where is ZBrush on this spectrum? Now, if we're thinking about tools that we have access to, where is ZBrush's specialty? To make it simple, I'm going to give it a quadrant. So quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. Where is ZBrush's specialty? Razvan saying 2. Anybody else? 1 and 2. In the center. Where's Maya's specialty? For those who use Maya. Where's Maya's specialty? 3 and 4, right? You're catching the drift. Is that not a brilliant business decision? Literally everybody, Maya, Max, XSI, Lightwave, Cinema 4D, they're all battling it out for hard surface and controlled sculpting tools. And the guys who start ZBrush, Ofer Alon and Jaime Labelle is the CEO, I think, or the COO. Can't remember which one at this point. And then of course there's the other founders, the money and all of that. They decide, hey, nobody's up here. This is where the party time is. Yay! Let's make this happen. I was working with another company, a massive visual effects house who's known for their own sculpting program. And they said that before, like I think 6 months before they had met ZBrush, they had researched the possibility of a real-time sculpting application, and they determined it was impossible. They said with current technology it was impossible, and then 6 months later, with technology hadn't advanced that much, they encountered ZBrush, and they were like, "What? How do you do that?" Nobody knew how Ofer, who's the main brains behind it, was able to have party time up there in the loose, soft, organic area, beat Maya, Max, XSI, companies that had billions of dollars worth of market capitalization. And ZBrush swoops in there and takes this all over. How the heck does something like that happen? That's a brilliant, brilliant decision. But here's another brilliant decision. Hey guys, since we own this market, why don't we come over here and own this market? Why don't we come over here and say, head towards you? Yeah, you. I'm looking at you. I'm looking at you. And instead of just owning that one territory, you're seeing them expand their feature set to start to directly compete with other programs and other mindsets. This is the core. When you're working in ZBrush, you're working in a specific mindset. And ZBrush and Pixelogic's job at this point, and they know it, their job is not just make cool tools. That's definitely job number one. But job number two, it's to fight for the mindset, the ZBrush mindset, because it's a totally different mindset. So you have things like ZModeler. It's not there yet. It's not there yet, but it's heading right towards Maya. It's heading right towards Max. It's not there yet, but it has a level of AI in it that is beyond most other tools out there. Now, it has a level of AI, but that AI sometimes isn't that smart. You got to give these smart robots a little bit of time before they overthrow us, okay? It's going to take them a little time, but once they get it all figured out, then we'll deal. Are you with me so far? You see them moving in down towards this bottom area. Some of the other things that they might be doing, nano mesh, array mesh. Anybody who uses Maya knows that array mesh, if you've seen it, and I'll do a little demonstration of it later, or at least I'll send one to you. Array mesh is particle instancing. particle instancing, a visual effects thing. In Maya, it's this totally separate thing. You have to go through all these hoops to build it into it. But now you see ZBrush going into particle instancing as it relates to creators and sculptors. That's going to be kind of cool to see. So, all right, let's talk about this system. So, you got a sense of where all of this fits in and how this moves. Let's start talking about what this system is, because ZBrush is broken up into systems. It does also have a lot of kind of AI and fuzzy logic in it. Like literally the code has this fuzzy logic built into so many different steps. But the systems. The first primary system, and I'm going to list these off the bat and then we'll kind of go through a little bit of a demonstration. The first system is the brush system. This is the tool that lets you sculpt, move things, adjust things of that nature. The next one is the polygon system. Okay, the polygon system is things like, say, resolutions. I'm going to go through these. If I've got time, I'm going to go through these, or I'll make sure you get it. But I just want to list these all right now. So just put your thinking caps on with me right now. And if something doesn't make sense, just hold 1 second. The sculpting happens here. I'm going to go through this real quick. Polygon systems. There are mesh generators. Okay, this is ZModeler. You could say this is also Dynamesh, so it's in 2 areas. Okay, and also Z-spheres. And extractions. Then there's the paint system. Okay, this is poly painting, because you don't just paint like other programs in ZBrush. You poly paint. UVs and maps. Exporting to outside systems. Procedural engine. So the procedural engine is array mesh. Nanomesh. There's map generators. The map generators are displacement maps, normal maps, things that get it out. There's little shape tools. And there's several other systems. But let's just put our eyes on these for the moment. Let's get through as many of these as we can. So, brush systems. Grab a screenshot of this if you want right now. Brush systems, polygon systems, mesh generators, paint systems, procedural engines, and map generators. This is a lot like what the curriculum is inside of the ZBrush Cert program. Because you need to think about things not in terms of, hey, this button in the subtool palette does X, Y, and Z. I'm not going to teach you just what the buttons do. I'm going to teach you how the brushes fit into a system. And it is a system. I mean, anybody who's done development knows that you don't just put a button in there and say, hey, this is the cool feature A button. It has to relate to some other thing and connect, or after a short period of time, you'll have a completely unusable piece of software because you've put too many crazy buttons that aren't connected, and real estate is precious in an interface. Anybody here design for webs or do UX design or UI design? Anybody here on the graphic design side of it? Because that's an art form. Being able to create the interface and whatnot so that everything is very simple and very easy and intuitive. And you might disagree that ZBrush is intuitive. I'm not going to argue with you there. But if we know that ZBrush is trying to do something different than most software, then we can maybe accept for a moment that it's intuitive from the planet that it's on. If you're on planet ZBrush, it's intuitive. And that's what I'll teach you in this class, is how to make it intuitive. You'll understand everything because you'll know the polygon system exists. You'll know the mesh generator system. The mesh generator system is really a fancy way of saying, how the hell do I get a model in ZBrush? How do I create a model in ZBrush? Like just a basic shape. I want to create a cup. Well, you can Z-model it, you can use Dynamesh, you can use Z-spheres, and you can import it. Okay? But then when do you know to use Dynamesh? So let's get ourselves in there. But I want to interrupt this for 1 second here because I like to get you thinking about ZBrush from another planet. My friend Meets Myers said, he used to say all the time that Ophir is from another planet. He actually already has ZBrush 15. We're just not ready for it yet. So ZBrush 15's already been done. We're on this planet, we're not there yet. So let me take a slightly different curve to this. Are you ready? Do you mind if I take you on a slightly different tangent? Anybody hear of spiral dynamics? And I don't bring it up lightly. There's a reason why I'm bringing this up. But anybody heard of spiral dynamics? Spiral dynamics is the study of consciousness, so to speak. Let me write this down. I'm a consciousness geek. Spiral consciousness. Spiral dynamics. It teaches about how there's these different levels of levels of consciousness. There's things like a purple level. There's things like a red level. There's a blue level, a yellow, a green, a turquoise. You see Ken Wilber talk about these things. I bring this up because one of the things, and especially for those of you who practice art, you know that there's something else going on. Like definitely we've got skill, we've got mediums that we have to learn, but you know that there are these moments when you get into what you are doing and you have a flow that almost doesn't feel like you. Has anybody else just made this drawing or this sculpt? Am I alone in this? Anybody else made this sculpt or whatnot where it's just like you don't really know how that happened? It just like came through you. Maybe it didn't even feel like sculpting. This happened to me just the other day. I was just drawing and 10 minutes later I'm like, what did I do? I don't remember. I'm not quite sure of it. And yeah, they say in the zone. There's something else going on to this process of creating art than just, hey, I need to learn my anatomy. There is. There has to be, because in that zone, we don't think anatomy, but everything flows. That's my hypnosis. That's mine. When you create a piece of software like this, it's not just about how do I put this button right next to you, but there is literally a consciousness discussion that has to happen. And okay, I get it. That sounds a little new agey, so you can take that with a grain of salt. But there is this discussion of how do you unlock the artist so that they just start being better. They don't even know how they're better. They just start being better. So there's this beautiful, beautiful consciousness kind of inside of ZBrush. But let's get back to this. So spiral dynamics, I'll let you go find out what spiral, what blue means, what yellow means, and all of that. There's some great discussions. But one of the things that Ken Wilber has, and he talks about in here, is this thing called lines of development. What Ken Wilber did with the whole spiral dynamics concept is kind of really build this up to be this amazing system to kind of help understand how consciousness works and how you can go from one level of consciousness to another, and back and back and back. And, he's trying to solve the problem of how does a guru create, horrible crimes, like some meditation guru creates just horrible crimes that just don't fit enlightenment. It's this beautiful system. Check it out. Check it out and see what you can kind of do. Because for me, the ZBrush system is a lot like this. It's a lot like this. There's the brush system, right? There's brush system, there's polygon system, there's mesh generator, there's paint, There's procedural. And then through the middle of this are these controls that line everything up. Things like groups, masking, visibility, so how does paint actually become a mesh? How can you convert a 2D texture of a shape that's like, let's just take a simple one, an S, and you convert that into a 3D piece of geometry? A 3D font. You can create 3D fonts inside of ZBrush. How are you able to create a paint or go from a 2D to a 3D piece? Through groups, masking, and through visibility. Yes, I just equated ZBrush with the entire ecosystem of spiritual consciousness. And Ken Wilber. It's the theory of everything. But that's just to give you a sense of this program is pretty awesome. I mean, I'm excited about the program. I love the program. I've been using this for 10 years. There's a reason I've been doing this for 10 years, you know. It's because there's just so much to it. So how are we? We're at about an hour. I want to talk to you a little bit about the systems, but depending on the time that you have, this is already open for registration. So if you need to jump, let me just make sure you know how you can get yourself into it. You can just go to uartsy.com. We've got early registration too. So you can just come into the fall term, click to see courses, you come down to this, and I may be logged in, so let's do an incognito window. You can register now. It'll take a day or two to show up in your account depending on when you kind of get this, but it is open as I am talking. So if you got to jump, remember, just go to uArtsy, go to the fall term, you can register right here. Pretty straightforward from that point. Okay. Any questions about that before we start jumping in and taking a little bit more time on the systems? I'll take about another 20 minutes for those who want to be around and see all of this. Any questions on what I've kind of gone through yet? Or so far would be proper English. Jason, early registration is in effect now. Sarah, yeah, good for newbies. I take you from step 1. Tyler, head over to the page. You literally see the curriculum right there. Your first sculpt, expand. Transition to ZModeler. You want to know more about what it is? It's all right in here. And feel free to email me at any point, but you can see how this works and what the focus is. Retopology, yeah, we get into that. And yes, retopology totally depends on what you're doing, because Dynamesh is in many ways a retopology. And for those who don't know about that, I'll try to talk about that in here in just the next minute. Jason, character design is its own art. Highly recommend getting into Mike DeFeo's course. Highly recommend it. All right, so let's talk ZBrush then. Nuno, still lifetime access. Matt, not quite sure I understand exactly what you're saying. Should just be 1. Just the 4R7. Just to get into the 4R7. I think that's where the confusion was. Nuno, yes, for the new versions. That's the definition, right? Free upgrades. So those who got it back in the early days, they've gotten every, because I re-release this and redo content. I mean, this is a staple of what the company does. It's there's like 60, 70, 90 hours of videos. I mean, it's obscene. So it always gets updated. It gets updated all the time. All the time. uartsy.com, Ariana. Okay, now let's get in and start talking about ZBrush, but if you have any questions, let me know. And Lago, if I knew when ZBrush 5 was be released, I still couldn't tell. They are very secretive. I want to illustrate the brush system in a very simple way, if you don't mind. I'm going to use just a very simple tool, because at the heart of the ZBrush brush system is one concept. It's the heart of ZBrush. So I'm going to just kind of walk through the different systems: brush, polygon, mesh generator, paint, procedural, maps, stuff like that. Here's the brush system. I'm going to do these quick because I know some of you guys you got to get running, but I want to make sure that I'm comprehensive for you. So at the heart of this, let's turn touch off, is this idea of topology independent brushes. This is the core defining principle of the brush system inside of ZBrush. In ZBrush 2, they were not topo independent. In ZBrush 3, the clay brush was the first topologically independent brush. Now, what the heck does that mean? Why are we even talking about topologically independent? In the early days, the way you sculpted was with the standard brush. So you had a two-step process. I'm going to use my hotkey for it. You had a two-step process. You would sculpt, and then you would smooth. So you would sculpt and smooth. Sculpt, gets a little lumpy, and then smooth. So if I'm trying to create like a nice hard edge here, I have this constant debate of how do I get this to be a nice hard edge. It's still possible, but it is a little bit of a different procedure. What you do is you add form, and then you melt form. But what you do, the secret to it is if you have a line like this where the edge is, you take the brush and you just go right back and forth to the edge, but you never go over. Don't go over. Just go right to the edge and you leave it. So let me demonstrate that really quick. This is a core principle that we teach in the very first week. Because controlling form is what this is all about, right? So let's just get a little bit of a mess in here. And so I've got a form, and now I want to be able to take this and say, dunk, dunk. How do I do that? Notice as I do this, I'm going to take my brush, and I'm going to take it right to the edge, but not past it. I'm pressing Shift to smooth. Okay, I've started to define a line. You can see that? Now I'm going to come to the other side. I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm not going to take my brush past that line. And there you go. I've started to define an edge. Is it a perfect edge? No, because this brush isn't really meant for precision. Because remember, again, it's way the heck up here. It's in loose and soft, right? That's where they started. That's where they made their reputation, their name. The clay brush is the one brush that allowed them to move loosely from soft to sort of hard. So let me demonstrate this. And I'll use the original brush, the clay brush. You might notice that several of these brushes have, like there's a clay buildup, clay tubes. That's my brush. I got to put that in. And then there's also a rake brush. I'm not sure if they took the rake brush out. That was my brush. And then there was, no, I think the other brush I put in is taken out. All right, so clay brush. I'm going to start. The idea behind this brush, when it was first developed, I was like, dude, what the heck kind of brush is this? Now I'm going to press Alt. When this brush first showed up on my desk, I was like, this is a failed flatten brush. And then it explained it to me, and I was like, oh, that's kind of smart. But now we have a little bit more precision in terms of how we kind of handle this. Not a ton. Let's check another brush. This is the latest beautiful brush from them. It came with the latest version, Clay Buildup. Our goal here, because this is just a crazy simple sculpting exercise, right? Our goal here is, can we control form? This is just a test, you know, instead of sculpting a portrait, which I could do, but then there's this kind of sculpting problem that I'm showing right now is like there's hundreds of these sculpting problems, the corners of the nose, the corner of the mouth, like all over. But now I'm going to start to smooth things out a little bit. And I don't know if you feel this, but it flows more naturally to create things that are not so loose. Because the alternative to this, again, is that soft, blobby brush. So I'm over here like this is a blob. You can feel it. It's blobby. I mean, look at that. If you're really paying attention, you'll notice that these squares, these polygons, they start to kind of stretch and skew, and they start to go and do kind of weird things. But over here, each one of these polygons maintains a certain sense of integrity. That's the core of this topology-independent brush system. The clay brush will tend to treat all the polygons the same. The standard brush will tend to skew and distort the polygon based on where it is. Is it off to the side? So then my brush comes along, well, it's going to shoot it this way or that way. It tends to do slightly unpredictable things. Do you see that kind of jumping out like that? And then these guys are all expanding and stretching and skewing and whatnot. But over here, a thing of beauty. Do, 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 do. And I was doing the same amount of sculpting in both sides, you know? And I didn't have that level of distortion. So that's the core concept behind topology-independent brushes. The other thing that becomes really important is because sometimes, for example, with the standard brush, in fact, let's just do this with the demo head. This is another of my models. I hated this model when I made it, and I'm not a big fan of it right now. But I made this model, and Ofra was like, "Hey, I like that. Let's put that in." And I was like, "No, it sucks." You know, because I only saw the mistakes. I still see the mistakes, but anyways, we need to find out this core problem. Standard brush. Let's fill the eye in. I'm going to do this with clay buildup. I just used a hotkey to select it. And I'm going to do just one eye. I want you to see how easy this is first. Okay, he's got an eye patch. Okay, some funky topology, but literally 5 seconds. Now, let's go into the standard brush. Same kind of thing, right? All I did over here was just round and round and round and round. Now I'm going round and round and round, and it looks like he had a rough night, right? Like a really rough night and a rough morning and a rough week. And this month is not going well for this guy. And then I come in here and I use my system, let's say smooth this out. And as I'm smoothing him out, it's not actually doing what I want, which is to flatten this. So then I have to start to use subdivision levels. Now it's flattening. So I go down in subdivision levels, I go back up, and through a couple of processes and procedures, I can get something. But I had to enlist more tools. I had to use my resolution levels. So I had to drop down. You're going to learn about this. So there's subdivision levels. There's this version that is just much smaller. And then it goes on up. I had to drop it down to get a manageable number of polygons for the standard brush. The clay brush was like, I don't care how many polygons there are there. I mean, this is my job. I do this for a living. Think I care if there's 1,000 polygons or 6,000 polygons or 6 million? The clay brush is going to behave the same. How are we with that concept? If there's nothing else that I can kind of communicate in this webinar, but that topology independent, that will help you understand what brushes are useful for you and where to go from there. But remember, clay brush also has its limitations. So I'll show you when standard brush is important. How's everybody doing? Give me a quick shout out. Let me know. Tyler's good. Andrea's good. Great. Jason's with me. All right, now the next thing we need to talk about is this polygon system. So the polygon system, we just saw a little bit of that in action. That's literally the subdivision levels. It's also things like Dynamesh. So I can come in here and Dynamesh this, which means that I can totally change its topology. So here's the topology where it's got holes for the mouth and all of that. And then this is Dynameshed and it's ready to go. So what kind of topology, and by topology I mean these little squares, what kind of topology is good for me to have as a sculptor? Does anybody know? Because topology is this great debate. What kind of topology do we need and things of that nature? But one of the things that I'll teach you is the different types of topology. We sometimes, it happens less and less now, but in the early days we used to say, hey, good topology is animatable topology. So good topology is something that has rings around it and edge flow and stuff like that. Why do we do edge flow, guys? Anybody have any thoughts? Why do we do edge flow and all of this monkey business in production? Anybody got an idea? Rigging, animation, yeah. These are all really valid, right on the nose points. The one reason though, the core reason why we deal with edge flow and things like that is because today's computers just suck. Like when you break it down to it, to the basics, you know, they're just not cutting the mustard. Why do we do UVs? Why do we do these technical things? Well, it's because our computers suck. Once we have quantum computers, are we going to be doing edge flow? Anybody got a thought? If we have quantum computers, are we really going to be doing edge flow? Hell no! Maya is going to be real-time deforming billions of polygons on the fly. In fact, you won't even have polygons, you probably have like virtual atoms. This is a problem that ZBrush had to deal with. We had to fight off, to some extent, people saying, hey, I need topology in my program, in ZBrush. I need topology. Why aren't you guys doing it? But Ofer knew that in the long term, all topology concerns are a stopgap fix for the fact that technology can't keep up yet, but it will. So he stayed focused on the prize. He let other people handle topology, and he did the things that just make it easier for you to sculpt. Point clouds. I mean, point clouds are vertices at the end of the day. So Maya has to use polygons because it has to triangulate vertices and help establish a relationship to be able to know what the fall off is, all this nonsense. It's all going to go away in, I don't know, 15, 20 years, which is a long time. so, so let's just stay focused on sculpting. All right, so things like resolution levels, being able to have more detail, things like Dynamesh, these are all part of the polygon system and subtools. Why is subtools so funny looking? Why is it like this? Why isn't it like a Maya outliner? I'll explain all of that. We'll talk all of that. But what I want to talk to you about next is this idea of mesh generation. Because one of the cool things about ZBrush and the latest ZBrush is really that Dynamesh is this incredibly powerful tool. So let's Dynamesh that. And then I'm going to come in here and say, use this brush called Snake Hook. And let's really go nutty. And I'm going to Dynamesh that. And let's pull that off to the side and off to the side and Dynamesh that. And I don't know, let's get a little flipper out there. No, let's make that really tiny. So now I got some kind of, what? Shall we name this? Who's going to name the beast? We've got some crazy beast. We don't know what it is yet, but it took us 30 seconds, Bob. And we're going to then go in and start to sculpt it. So we'll start to come in and do things like, hey, let's put an eyeball in there. But then I need more resolution, right? So then I come in and I start to put an eyeball and I start to define things. And you'll see Peter Koenig has a really awesome class where he shows how he creates these just beautiful forms and details for stuff. And then we go in and we start to build our character from that. Dyna Seal. I love it. Especially now that he's got that awesome smile. Dynamesh now is this it's this mesh generation tool, because before you had Dynamesh, you had to come in here and do this. Okay, so let's see, where's the point? And oops, I screwed up. Okay, I got that, and then I need to, dang it. Let me get it in here, and then always I'm missing that, and then where did that go? And then I'm going to move this down and up, and let's pull this fit. Always I'm doing that. No, I got to go into draw mode. I'm going to pull this out. I got to go into move mode, and then I press A, and there you go. Right? I'm starting to get my whale sore, my mutant dolphin, or Bob, as Tyler calls him. But this was not a intuitive process. It's cool, and once I explain to you how Z-spheres work, you'll be like, oh, that's really neat. Thank God I don't have to do it. I just can enjoy it, you know? It just takes longer. But Dynamesh is so much simpler, so much more fluid. So there's these mesh extraction tools, but then there's other mesh extraction tools. And in fact, the first mesh extraction tools we used for Demo Soldier, which is also my model. We also call him the man in tights. All of these parts were pulled from extractions. An extraction is a little feature down here. We're running out of disk space. Okay. So Dynamesh, or extraction, is another way that you create stuff. Let's just close this out. You come in here and you say, make a mask. Remember those lines of development that I talked about earlier? That Ken Wilber reference? Lines of development. Masks bridge multiple features, and then you come in here and you say, hey, extract that, accept it, and then it becomes a jacket. You know, we're a little careless there, so we picked up some pieces, but that's easy to deal with. But now I have a shirt. or a piece of armor or something else to work with. Very useful for accessories. Okay, then there's the paint system. So let's make sure, let's head over here and let's talk about paint system. It has a paint system inside of it, polypaint. Let's turn polypaint off. It also has a texture map. We turn the texture map off. There you go. But the cool thing about the texture map, you turn this into a polypaint. So right now, I've already said, I'll say polypaint from texture. Make sure, Ryan, that you have RGB on. So we do that again. Texture on, polypaint from texture, and there you go. Texture map is off. Now we can come in here and remember lines of development. We can go into a mask and we say mask by color intensity. Now we come in here to polypaint and we turn colorize off and we have a mask. So then we come in here and we go into deformations or inflate. In fact, let's turn polypainting off again. Every time you undo it does that. Let's turn masking. I want to turn view mask off. Deformation. 1. Let's go 3. 3. Let's go -1. And we're starting to literally pick up pore level information. Now, of course, this all depends on your texture, how much detail is there, as well as how many polygons you have. So here we go. We've got this system where we can go from a texture into sculpt. We got to remember our masks, our polygon system, how many, what's resolution, how do we cut things up, where do we do, all of that. There's a lot of things to be done, but this paint system has one feature that's really important. The paint is done not per UVs, but directly on the polygon faces. So let's undo any deformation so you can see that a little better. You're really zoomed in right now and you might see some faceting. Painting inside of ZBrush is per vertice, which is really kind of cool. That means that you use the exact same brushes that you use here. The standard brush is literally the same brush I use to sculpt as I use to paint. The exact same. Then there's also the rendering system. How do you render this so that it does really cool things? You know, how do we get a realistic render? Now, I just did what's called a best preview render, but then I can come in here and I can apply these filters. So I like to apply like a little negative gamma. This adds some contrast in there. And then I come up here and I up the red, the green, and the blue. And then I check my shadows and I might lower the shadow strength and I'll rotate it and render this again. And then we learned this really cool trick in the class, how you can use a material. Okay, I'm going a little fast right now, but I just want to show you one kind of trick that's just really neat, because now we get to come in here and say mix materials on the screen. So I'm going to mix this by hue and anything that is on the yellow side. But I'm going to make this a little bit less ambient, less of this, maybe more specular, less specular. And we start to kind of just futz around with things. See if we can start to really create some different impacts. So that specularity is just way too much right in there. There we go. Start to dial that back. And there's a couple of other tricks. I'll see if I can send you off something that shows you kind of the fastest cool rendering thing I can think of. Filters can do a lot. There's this great new paint filter that can instantly make things start to look a little bit more illustrative or whatnot. Let's say, come in here. Yeah, I'm gonna lower this down a little bit. It just starts to flood it so that the same color is kind of everywhere. Then we can come into our blue and we can start to increase the blue. And come into our green and start to really increase green. But then we can also say only increase the green in specific areas. So let me come in here, shader channel 2, and yeah, we'll leave that like it is. But then we're going to increase green only on the edges. So now we get this different effect, this totally different illumination quality, right? And this is just me on the fly trying out different things. How do you work this system? Now, the last thing that I want to show you today, because where are we time-wise? Last thing I want to show you is the procedural system. So let's close this out. We'll get that out of the way. I'm going to show you a model. In fact, why don't I just load the, let me show you the model, then I'll load the scenes. This is a 3D model, totally exploded. This is a 3D model. Now let's look at these rendered. It's loading the project data right now. We're going to look at procedurals, and then we're going to call this a day. I'm going to go actual in here. And let me just do a best preview render so you can see what this is. When I first got the new ZBrush, I didn't know what to do with it. But then I started just thinking about my own stuff, and I ended up making, several cool little illustrations. Flowers. Different kinds of flowers, different kinds of shape, these translucent little things, these little translucent jelly beans. These are all using the rendering system. But then if I move this around, it's total 3D. Look at the background. That background's just placed in there. I'm not using Illustrator or Photoshop. I'm rendering entirely inside of ZBrush. It's composed of a lot of subtools. Look at all of those. And there's a process that I go through. So I'm going to just kind of walk you through a little bit of it. It all starts with these kinds of models. And then I start using procedural tools to extract shapes, lines, all kinds of fun stuff. And I'll show you that. The system and how this works is really just a fascinating system. Being able to create these things, I mean, look at that. Really, at the end of the day, the amount of freedom that ZBrush has given me, this could be something that goes in a gallery. For me, for you. Create your sculpts, 3D print them, put these pieces together, and there's a whole different level of sculpting happening. That's the art side of it. The other side of it, of course, is do your sculpts digitally, send them off to China to get manufactured, which is what all the toy companies do now, and on you go, right? So there are so many ways to use this program for your own art, for your career and your job, or for your career during the day, your art on the weekends and at night, which is what some of us end up doing. We end up doing that, and it still works because ZBrush is a medium. When do you ever get sick of oil paint? Maybe you get sick of oil paint, or you get sick of clay, but they're a way of breathing almost, of living. And my goal is that I help you get that way with ZBrush so that it's a medium for you. So head over there to UArtsy if you want to sign up today. I'll send you a replay and get you going, and you'll have this, and I'll update you on anything that we go from there. But otherwise, I want to wish you a fantastic day. Let me know if you're at the summit. I may be there. The ZBrush Cert program is never on demand, Razvan, because it's a cert. So I have to interact with everybody to really connect and assess and get the information. All the other courses are offered as on demand, but not the cert. It's the one exception. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Margarita. Thanks, Jason. Razvan, can't tell you about the next semester, right? We just try to release it as often as we can. We can also take a break. My wife would like me to take a break. But there's too much good stuff. Alrighty. Take care. Sign up today, guys, or stay tuned for more information. And I will talk to you later. Have a fantastic weekend. Are we at the weekend? We're almost at the weekend. Have a fantastic Friday. That's the better one. And then a great weekend. I'll see you guys later. Let me know. Email me if I can do anything. And happy Z brushing, as we say.